Well, as a doctor, I realised the best way to practice good medicine was to sit down and create an atmosphere where the patients felt at home, when they could really tell me what was on their mind. And that's a great way of practicing medicine, because they would tell you all the right symptoms, and then you could make an accurate diagnosis usually. But of course they told me so much more besides. If they're relaxed, they'll talk and talk and talk. And that's how I found out about the violence against women. At first, of course, one doesn't believe it. You think, well, it can't be going on. And then, of course, they say, oh, well, it's, working classes, they do that sort of thing. I thought, wait a minute, there's something funny about this. And then, of course, I came across a patient in middle-class Dulwich with two black eyes. No, she had sunglasses, that was it, in the middle of winter. And I thought, sunglasses in the middle of winter? She was hiding two black eyes given to her by her husband, who was a policeman. And then, all these stories sort of accumulated, and I realized what an enormous problem it was, violence against women. And then, of course, I got to learn about human trafficking and slavery. And so I became determined to do something about it, basically. And you can put down a private member's bill. They can't stop you doing it. And I put this down. And of course, private members' bills tend not to get very far. So I sent it to Prime Minister Cameron. And he said, oh, well, we must do this, but let's not call it human trafficking. Let's call it what it is. It's human slavery, you see. So he really got the bit between his teeth. And then he gave it to his Home Secretary, Theresa May, and she ran with it and then became Prime Minister, and she's been running with it ever since. And everywhere she goes, she talks about it, United Nations, European Union, and so on. So she's been a great advocate for the bill. Then, of course, it became an act, and it's beginning to change things, not only in this country, but many other countries in the world, because every country in the world is involved in this, and unfortunately. It's a huge problem, as you know. Well, there was a bit of a gap in the first bill, because it didn't pay too much attention to getting them back to a normal life. And so the second bill does that, or at least that's what it proposes. And one of the things is that they need plenty of time to adjust. And they only had a few months after they'd been identified as human trafficking people. And so I put down the bill really to give them a year, because it takes about a year to really sort yourself out and sort out all the problems, the legal problems and so on. And the government wasn't very keen on this, but they did extend it to, I think it's 90 days. I think that's the latest proposal. But even that isn't enough for them to make all the necessary adjustments. But it basically, because it doesn't provide enough time and attention for them to get back to a normal life. It's all the charities that work with trafficked people, with human slaves, they all say it's a year at least they need. And they're unanimous, they're all agreed about that. Sometimes it's difficult to get agreement with lots of different charities, but they're all agreed on this particular timetable. And so it gives them the opportunity, or it would give them the opportunity, to really get back to normal, to learn language, to learn a trade, and so many different things. And it's so important that they're given that opportunity. Because the trouble is, you see, if they're identified as being slaves, they're then in limbo, as it were. The Salvation Army, of course, have been very, very helpful, and they provide safe homes and so on. But there's always the gap after they leave, and they're vulnerable then for the traffickers to re-traffic them. That's the difficulty. And a lot of them are re-trafficked. So we need to give them every opportunity to really get back to a normal kind of life after the appalling traumas through which they've been. Yes, well, you get a young boy from the Far East to come in, and they're collared by these traffickers. And the trouble is, they take their passports away, they take away their identity, they take away their independence, and they're beholden on the traffickers for somewhere to live, something to eat, so they become very dependent on them. And if they escape, they're threatened that their relatives back home, be it in Vietnam or wherever, they will go for them and kill them sometimes. So those threats are very, very severe and very alarming. And so they become really dehumanized. And so they really do need a great deal of support. And I pay tribute to the Salvation Army. They've been marvellous, the way they have coped and given them safe houses. And they are safe. I visited them, and you never know where they are because they don't tell you. You're led there at the last moment, as it were. So it's very safe, very secure, and a loving atmosphere. But one of the problems is that if you put a bill down, and this bill I got all the way through the House of Lords, it's a more civilised arrangement really, but then in the Commons you have a real problem. As you know, all it takes is for one member of the House of Commons to shout, "I object," and the bill is rejected, which I think is appalling really.